From Bloomberg Quick Take, I'm Renita Young, and this is Your Money Story. Now, we are still in Women's History Month, and today I want to introduce you to Paula Pant of Afford Anything, a growing personal finance community that's already pretty large, more than 65,000 subscribers to her newsletter, as well as millions who have downloaded the Afford Anything podcast. And today we will talk about how women can achieve financial success and financial independence. Paula, come on in and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, of course, here on Your Money Story, we start with your money story. And I want to talk about how you grew up the child of immigrants and you saw how frugal your parents were growing up after you guys immigrated here from Nepal. Tell me how that shaped the way that you related to money in your early adulthood.
Sure, absolutely. So my parents, I was born in Kathmandu, Nepal. I was 2 months old when I came to the United States. And so I watched my parents as I was young. They went through that getting started, that getting established. You know, they shortly before I was born, they bought their very first car ever. It was after I was born that they moved out of an apartment and we got a very small home, a small starter home that my dad didn't even have the money for a down payment. So he had to borrow the money from someone that he worked with to get the down payment to get into the starter home. And so now that I'm an adult, I see a lot of my friends worried that, oh, I'm 35 and I haven't hit X goal yet, or I'm 40 and I haven't hit X goal yet. And I think back to my parents who all of these milestones, oftentimes in the United States, people get their first car at 16. Mm-hmm. My parents got their first car at like 43. So I just watched my parents go through these milestones later in life. My dad opened his first retirement account when he was 50. And we were very frugal because we had to be. And so a lot of that chasing status symbols of, designer brand handbags or nice cars, that just wasn't in our consciousness. We never felt deprived. It just wasn't part of our lives.
And likewise, it wasn't necessarily in your consciousness either. But you obviously were not always financially independent. You became so in your adulthood. But take me to the moment when you started to think that maybe I can go about this differently. It happened when you graduated from high school, right?
When I graduated from college.
College, pardon me.
Yeah, when I was in college, I really wanted to study abroad. That was a big goal, except study abroad programs were prohibitively expensive. They were $15,000 to $20,000 for a single semester. And so my thinking, being someone who's naturally frugal, my thinking was, you know what, I honestly, I don't want to study. I just want to go abroad. And I thought that if I graduate, work for a few years, save up some money, I could then quit my job and go travel, and I could do it for a fraction of the cost. And so that was always my plan. And so when I was in my early 20s, and a lot of my friends were trading up to, getting nicer apartments with, were nicer cars, or they were going out and buying, $14 drinks at bars. I was instead focused on saving as much money as possible in a travel fund. And so that was, I think, probably the point in my money story where I got very clear on what my goals were, even though those goals were different from what society says they should be. Mm-hmm. And I became obsessed with saving money for a specific goal, despite the fact that meant that I wasn't, quote unquote, keeping up with the Joneses.
Got it. And so I understand you did this by any freelance gig that you had. You chucked the money away in savings, eventually saving up enough to go abroad. And so this all kind of points us to afford anything. Yeah. You have a philosophy that says you can afford anything, but not everything. Exactly. Can you first explain to us what do you say that means and how it relates to not just your money, but the rest of your life?
Sure, absolutely. So you're absolutely correct. So over the span of 3 years, I managed to save up $25,000. And And once I had that money, I quit my job and I went to go travel. And when that happened, my friends often said, I would love to do that, but I can't afford it. That was the refrain that I heard over and over and over. But these were the same friends who I knew worked in higher paying jobs than I did, but they drove nicer cars, they lived in nicer apartments. And so that was where I really came up with this philosophy that you can afford anything, but not everything, meaning every choice that you make carries a trade-off. Saying yes to something implicitly means saying no to all other opportunities. And that doesn't just apply to your money, that applies to your time, to your energy, to your focus, to where you direct your attention. So it applies to every decision that you make in your life. And what happens is that often I find that we're unconscious of these trade-offs. Some given opportunity may sound interesting, like, oh, I would love to do XYZ. I'd love to go to that concert. I would love to live in a bigger home. But we don't pause and think about, what am I giving up in order to do this? So the afford anything philosophy was really born of making that question clear.
That makes sense. When you think about it, you can't afford everything, but you can afford anything. And so, talk just a little bit more about how this, how you apply this to your focus, energy, and attention.
Sure, absolutely. So, oh, this has happened so many times during my life, especially as I've been navigating my career. The job that I quit when I went to go travel, my peak income at the time that I quit was $31,000 per year. And so I was freelancing on the side. I was freelancing during the evenings and weekends. And at an hourly rate, I was making at that time up to $75 an hour at my peak. So here I was working this 9 to 5 day job in which I earned 31,000 a year, but I was making much more money on an hourly basis as a freelancer. And so it became clear to me that that was where the opportunity was. And as I ventured after I quit that job and started traveling, I decided I was going to make a go of being a freelancer full time. And in that world, I mean, the amount of things you possibly could do are endless. Like, no shortage of, do I grow my business this way or that way? Do I spend more time on social media or on sending pitches? Do I accept this particular gig, which is money immediately, but it's kind of low paying? Or do I say no, and despite the fact that I don't have something else, and refocus that time on trying to find something else that is higher paying? Like, there are endless decisions to make, and every single one has a trade-off.
And you've worked it to really work with you and the kind of life you want, the kind of schedule you want, how you want to spend your time. And so that's a lot of what you teach people. And we're talking about women today for Women's History Month. It's a lot of what you teach folks on Afford Anything. And so because it's Women's History Month, we know that there is a strong case for women to achieve financial success and become financially independent. What is your case for why women need to become financially independent?
Oh, well, so I define, let's start with the definition of financial independence. In the way that I define it, in the way that I understand it, is I see financial independence as the point at which your potential passive income, which is typically through investments, is enough to create a safety net. It's enough to cover a bare bones, standard of living. So that, and particularly I think for women, there are many times that women have to make, when it comes to trade-offs, have to make decisions about, do I become a caregiver for maybe an aging parent or an aging grandparent, or do I pursue this other opportunity that would be a great career opportunity, but would require me to move 1,000 miles away from my family? And all people make that decision, men and women both. But we see those kinds of decisions come up throughout our lives. And when financial independence is in the picture, it removes some of the necessity from that decision making. So I define financial independence as, imagine if you had a sibling and hopefully this would never happen, but imagine if your sibling becomes very ill and you want to spend 6 months taking an unpaid leave of absence so that you can go take care of him or her. You want enough money through your investments that you could, at a minimum, buy groceries, keep the lights on. You wouldn't be living large. You wouldn't be living your best dream life, but you could at least take care of things, keep the bills paid, keep the lights on while you're tending to this other thing that's very important. And I think that, for everyone, and particularly for women, it creates a safety net that is just invaluable.
You're absolutely right. I mean, back when you said that women are more likely to make those tough decisions of where to live, having to do caregiving of family members, childcare even, of kids, and even elder care. Women are still more likely to need to make those decisions, and therefore may need to quit a job, may need to reduce hours, and will need financial independence. Something else that I found out, that these facts we probably know, but I just want to name them because I've never thought about this as a reason why women need financial independence. Statistically, women live longer than men and earn less. Right. Also, the 2018 Bureau of Labor Statistics report said that the median weekly earnings for full-time salaried women, they're just 81% of what men earn. And then also on top of that, women are often faced with discrimination in terms of wages and advancement opportunities. Add on the layer of women of color, and it's even deeper situation. So there's obviously a very strong case for why women need to be financially independent, and you just helped us lay it out there. And so one part of your philosophy as well, I find that you had a very, very unique perspective on budgets that not a lot of personal finance experts actually have. And we know that as adults, we should have a budget because it's the right thing to do as grown-ups, right? Exactly. What about the people who hate budgeting? What should they do?
Well, you're in good company because I'm with you. And so I've developed this approach that I refer to as the anti-budget. The anti-budget is very simple. So the first thing that you do is you decide how much money you want to save. And when I say save in this context, I mean anything that improves your net worth. So it could be literal savings in a savings account. It could be money like additional payments that you put towards a debt above and beyond the minimum payment required. It could be contributions to a retirement account. Any improvement of your net worth is what I mean when I say save. So decide how much you want to save, and that could be either a raw dollar amount or it could be a proportion of your income, doesn't matter, but choose what that's going to be, pull that off the top first, and then whatever is left over is yours to spend. And I think the simplicity of the anti-budget makes it more likely that you'll follow through, because so many budgets demand that we excessively line itemize everything to the point where we know exactly how much money we're spending on toothpaste and dog food. and like, who has time for that? And who can stick with that? It's kind of like those apps where I've downloaded so many apps where I'm supposed to input every single thing that I eat all day. Mm-hmm. And I stick with it for maybe a week and a half. And then I can't. Every lunch. Yeah,
it can get overwhelming. You're right, because it's tracking every single penny. But it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you prioritize spending even over paying the bills. So that's the philosophy, huh? You prioritize spending over paying the bills, but you work everything else in there. And you've also expanded your definition of what savings is, like you just said before. So that makes sense, of course. And so speaking of saving, what are some very practical ways people can start saving right now? Women can start saving.
Mm-hmm. So this is a great question. So first of all, when I think of savings as a framework, there are two choices. What you want to do is grow the gap between what you earn and what you spend. And oftentimes the word savings has this connotation of a reduction in spending. But I want to move away from that connotation and focus on increasing the gap between income and spending. And once we look at it in that context, then the best way to, for some people, depending on who you are, the best way to save may be to earn more. That's not true for everybody, and that's not true in all contexts, but I want to make that clear because the word saving it does have that connotation of a reduction of spending, and that's not necessarily always the best approach for everyone. So if the goal is to increase the gap between what you earn and what you spend, there are fundamentally three ways to do it. You could either earn more, you could spend less, or you could do a combination of the two. Now, if we do want to talk about the spend less side of the equation, we'll discuss that first. Oftentimes, the discussion tends to center around consumer discretionary purchases. So I think we tend to give undue focus to these small tweaks that we can make. Oh, don't go get manicures, and unfortunately, those are sort of the expenses that happen in the margins, and they because of salience, like, it's easy for them to come to mind, and they're easy adjustments to make. And so oftentimes the discussion, I think, over focuses on those, when in fact, the majority of spending in most US households are the big three: housing, transportation, food. So if you really want to cut back on spending, those three areas, reducing the size of your home, radically altering your transportation. Maybe you go from a 2-car family to a 1-car family.
Mm-hmm.
These are harder adjustments to make. I mean, we're talking about selling your home and moving to somewhere, to something that's 1,000 square feet smaller. Like, that's not an easy shift.
Right.
It's much more meaningful than than some of the consumer discretionary stuff that tends to get, I think, overemphasized.
Okay. You know what? Those are all pretty practical, and they may be things that people don't think about all the time. But we have a quick question from the audience. Someone wants to know how to invest your STEMI check.
All right. So fundamentally, how to invest your stimulus check is how to invest any amount of money, particularly, if you weren't expecting this money and you don't need it to pay your bills. Right. And so in order to approach that, the first question that I've got for everyone who's wondering that is, do you have an adequate emergency fund? If not, that's your first priority. And an emergency fund should represent at least 3 months of your ordinary expenses, ideally 6 months. If you really want to be very, very taken care of, you can even increase that to 8 or 9 months. But somewhere in that window, make sure you've got a good emergency fund. That's first and foremost. Second, the next question that I've got for you is, what is the timeline of that investment? So if you are investing money that you intend to use for retirement, and if you are 25 years old and you want to retire at 65, that retirement is 40 years away, then you can invest that money in a very different way than someone who wants to invest that money for the purpose of sending their child to college. They want to invest that money in a 529 plan, so that their kid can go to college in 15 years, right? So the timeline associated with that investment, which is another way of saying the goal associated with that investment, is going to influence the type of risk that's appropriate for that investment.
Okay, that makes sense, because it's like you have to have a plan for it. It depends on what your desire is with that money.
Yeah.
What you're saying that determines, how much of it you invest, whether you put it in the savings or elsewhere.
Right.
Markets maybe. And so
end in mind, essentially.
Right. It makes sense. And so I want to know if you have any special investment strategies that women can go ahead and use right now.
Ooh, special investment strategies. Well, I mean, I don't know how special it is, but here are a few of my favorites. So first, tax advantaged accounts. These include 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, Roth IRAs. HSAs, if you have a health insurance plan that's HSA eligible, those types of tax advantaged accounts are enormous. Like they provide, in addition to getting the growth that comes with the fact that this money is invested in the market, you also have various tax advantages that come from the very nature of these accounts. So I absolutely encourage people to look to those types of accounts first, if it's appropriate for the timeline of the investment. Low cost passively managed index funds are a favorite of mine because an index fund is a fund in which you are not betting on a single company. So it's not like buying an individual stock in which you are trying to assess if Tesla or Nike or Coca-Cola is going to do well. You are instead buying a big basket of stocks that replicate an underlying index. Mm-hmm. And that means that you will do, ideally, as well as or as poorly as that underlying index. No better, no worse. And mutual funds also set out to, actively managed mutual funds also set out to defray some of that risk by investing in a basket of stocks. But actively managed mutual funds often have very high expense ratios, meaning high fees that are not necessarily justified. And so you can get that same diversification, but eliminate the fees by focusing on index funds instead. So tax advantaged accounts, index funds.
Great. And it sounds like those are really good. A lot of first-time investors and relatively experienced investors watch Your Money Story. And that sounds like it's pitched to both the risk averse and the people who don't mind a little bit of risk. And so we're coming to a close shortly, but of course, men and women watch Your Money Story. And so there are a lot of people watching this who want to know how they can do what you did, escape their 9 to 5. And so what's the single most important thing that people need to know before they do this? You wrote a book about it.
I'd say two things. One is, however you plan on making money outside of your normal 9 to 5, do that, test drive that while you're still at your 9 to 5. So during the evenings, the weekends, whatever you have some time off, test drive your idea of how you're going to make money. And this will do two things. One is it will give you a little bit of extra money, some extra savings that will buffer that transition. But secondly, and honestly, I think what's more important is it gives you proof of concept. If you have this idea of how you're going to make money outside of your 9 to 5, you test it, you see if it works. If it does work, great. And if it doesn't, you learn that while you still have your day job. Mm-hmm. And then you can pivot, you can tweak, you can iterate while you still have the security of that paycheck. So that's the first thing that I would say. And the second thing is think big. After you do leave your 9 to 5, be clear on if you're trying to build a lifestyle business versus something that's going to take outside funding. Like it's fine to build a lifestyle business, and that's what I've done. But just because you're building a lifestyle business doesn't mean that you need to necessarily think small. Like you can impact a large number of people, and the greater impact that you have, the more you make. Like not only do you make money, but you help more people. You build a team. You have more flexibility as a result of not trying to do everything yourself. A lot of times people who leave the 9 to 5 try to do everything on their own. And sometimes it's better to, bring in a team, create a team of people who compensate for your weaknesses and help you focus on your strengths.
All right. That sounds really good. Very well put. And as you can hear, we're in a live studio, so you can hear a little bit of the news happening behind. But before we end, I have to ask you about the concept of purpose, because that's included, of course, it's woven into just about everything you talk about on your podcast and on your blog, and even when you're speaking at FinCon. And so just how important is it that one understands what purpose means to them whenever they do consider escaping that 9 to 5?
So, I mean, purpose, of course, is important, but it's also intimidating. Like,
Mhm.
the idea that you need to find your purpose in life. I mean, okay, I'll do that by lunch, right? Like, and so for anyone who's like, I don't know what my purpose is, I don't know what the meaning of my life is, that's a big question. To anyone who feels that way, what I would say is follow your curiosity.
Hmm.
If there's something that you're curious about, follow that and see where it leads. And the more you do that, the more you continue to follow your curiosity, the more that I think your clarity around purpose will slowly evolve over time.
I think that's a perfect way and place to leave it. Paula Pant of Afford Anything, thank you so much for joining us. And folks in the audience, if you want to learn more about Afford Anything, you can find Afford Anything on social platforms across the web at Afford Anything. This has been Your Money Story from Bloomberg Quick Take. I'm Renita Young. Have a wonderful day.